She balanced trays with a trembling, bandaged hand, the weight of each cup revealing more than just physical pain. As whispers floated through the diner, pitying hushed murmurs and questioning glances. He watched from a broken booth, a man in plain clothes whose heart tightened the moment he saw the fear beneath her forced smile. What brought her here, fighting through agony instead of seeking help? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why was Denise Carter, a waitress barely able to hold a coffee pot with her bandaged hand, still pushing herself through every shift? What dark secret was she hiding that made her work when most people would have stayed home, nursing their wounds? And how far would one man, Harold, the undercover owner sitting quietly in the corner booth, go to uncover the truth that no one else dared to see? Denise's smile told customers she was fine, but her eyes revealed something else entirely, an exhaustion deeper than physical pain, a fear that seemed to flicker whenever Ross, the diner's strict and volatile manager, entered the room. To outsiders, this was just a small-town diner, but to Harold, what he saw in those moments raised questions he couldn't ignore. Because beneath the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, a hidden story was waiting to be exposed. Denise Carter had never been one to complain. To most who walked into the diner, she was simply the friendly waitress who greeted them with a warm smile, even if that smile was often strained by fatigue. But away from the coffee pots and bustling chatter, Denise's life told a different story. She was a single mother, raising her teenage daughter in a cramped two-bedroom apartment just outside of town. The wallpaper peeled in spots, the stove clicked twice before the flame caught, and the rent was always just a little more than she could manage. She kept family photos tucked in the corners of mirrors and taped to the refrigerator, snapshots of birthdays, messy cakes, and school projects, reminders of the little victories that kept her moving forward. For Denise, working meant survival. Every shift was another chance to keep the lights on and food on the table, no matter the cost to her own body. Ross, the manager, often reminded everyone that this diner was his kingdom, and he ruled it with a mixture of charm and intimidation. Some employees called him fair, others whispered about his temper when customers weren't looking. He was respected by regulars for running a tight ship, but behind the kitchen door, his tone could cut as sharply as a knife. Denise bore the brunt of his moods more than once, brushing off his harsh words as if they were just part of the job. But co-workers noticed the way her shoulders tightened when Ross walked in, how her voice lowered, cautious, careful not to provoke him. For those who only saw the cheerful waitress, it was easy to overlook the silent weight she carried each day. Yet for Denise, every moment under Ross's watchful eye felt like balancing on a wire. One wrong step, and everything she was holding together might collapse. And then there was Harold. To the staff, he was just another customer sitting in the corner booth, nursing a black coffee that seemed to last for hours. But Harold wasn't just any customer. He was the owner of the diner, a man who had built his business on old-fashioned values of hard work and respect. Disguised in plain clothes, he chose to see his diner from the ground level, to watch not as a boss, but as an observer. Years had given him both wisdom and a quiet, unshakable sense of justice. He believed that how people treated others when no one was watching revealed their true character. And as he watched Denise struggle through her shifts with her injured hand, forced to carry trays she could barely balance while Ross barked orders from across the room, Harold's suspicions began to grow. Something about Denise's determination, and the fear behind her eyes, told him this was not just about a broken hand. The diner itself was a backdrop to lives unfolding in quiet desperation and resilience. Regular customers knew Denise by name, offering small tips and polite conversation, never realizing the silent calculations running through her mind. Which bill to pay first? What to sacrifice this week to make sure her daughter had what she needed? The fluorescent lights and clattering dishes masked the deeper reality that Denise lived every day. Exhaustion that no amount of coffee could cure, loneliness that lingered even in a crowded room, and a quiet desperation to keep moving forward without letting anyone see her stumble. She was the every woman, Someone countless women across the country could see themselves in. Hardworking, selfless, carrying burdens too heavy to share. Yet beneath her unwavering smile was something she prayed no one would ever discover, a truth she kept hidden even from those closest to her. And Harold, sitting silently in his corner booth, knew that truth was waiting to be uncovered. Denise Carter's bandaged hand trembled as she tried to steady a tray loaded with steaming plates, the strain written across her face, though she tried to mask it with a polite smile. The diner's rhythm carried on around her, the hiss of the griddle, the clinking of forks against plates, the steady hum of conversation. But all eyes turned when a glass slipped from her grip and shattered on the tiled floor. Before she could even bend down to collect the shards, Ross's voice cut through the room like a whip. "If you can't do the job, don't bother showing up," he snapped, his tone laced with irritation. The room went uncomfortably silent. Some customers shifted in their seats, pity softening their faces, while others averted their eyes, unwilling to witness her humiliation. Denise muttered an apology. Her cheeks flushed and returned to her work with her head lowered, as though absorbing the weight of yet another burden she could not shake. Harold sat in the corner, his gaze fixed on Denise as she moved from table to table. Every stumble, every forced smile, every attempt to carry on in silence only deepened his concern. He had seen employees injured before, but something about Denise's injury did not add up. Her explanation, offered in fragments to curious regulars, shifted from story to story. Sometimes it was a kitchen accident, other times a fall at home. The inconsistencies caught Harold's attention, and with each passing day, he grew more certain there was more beneath the surface than Denise let on. He watched closely, noticing how she avoided Ross's eyes, how she tensed when he entered the room, how her laughter with customers disappeared the moment his voice rang out from the back. Harold knew what it looked like when someone was working through pain, but this was different. This was fear disguised as endurance. The whispers among customers grew louder as the days passed. Some leaned across booths, murmuring about the poor waitress working with an injured hand. Others shook their heads and wondered why the manager let her on the floor at all. A few offered sympathy in the form of kind words or generous tips, but most looked away, content to let the scene play out without intervention. For Harold, the silence was deafening. He had built his diner on the belief that work should never strip a person of dignity, yet here he was, watching as Denise carried trays she could barely lift, enduring scorn instead of support. He wondered what held her in place. Was it financial desperation, a sense of duty, or something more complicated? Every question he asked in his mind pulled him closer to the truth, a truth he knew he could not ignore much longer. Still, Denise carried on, her determination etched into every movement. She wiped tables with her good hand, balanced trays on her forearm, and forced smiles for customers who could see right through them. Beneath the chatter of the diner, Harold noticed the silence between her and Ross. It wasn't the silence of indifference. It was heavy, weighted with something unspoken. And then came the moment that confirmed Harold's suspicion. As Denise brushed past Ross near the counter, she flinched, her body recoiling at the slightest touch. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but to Harold it spoke louder than any words she could have said. Something was wrong. Something far worse than an accident with a hot pan or a stumble on the stairs. Harold's jaw tightened as he realized he was watching a story unfold that would change everything he thought he knew about his own diner. Because the truth about Denise's injury was far darker than anyone imagined. Harold had spent decades building the diner into a place where families gathered and regulars became part of a larger community. But now, watching Denise Carter struggle through each shift with her broken hand, he felt a responsibility that weighed heavier with every passing day. He began asking questions, casual at first, almost offhand, like a friendly customer making conversation. "Rough week?" he would say, or "Must be hard working with an injury like that." Denise answered politely, her voice soft, but her words were vague. She spoke of an accident in the kitchen one day, a fall on the steps another. Each story shifted slightly, never settling into a truth that made sense. Her eyes darted away when pressed, and Harold saw something in her hesitation that spoke louder than the words she chose. Fear. There was more here than she wanted anyone to know, and Harold was determined to find out what. When the questions didn't yield answers, Harold turned to what he could observe. Denise's uniform looked neat but worn, her shoes scuffed from years of double shifts. A small purse sat tucked beneath the counter, and when it spilled once, Harold caught a glimpse of unopened bills, envelopes stacked thick with overdue notices. Rent, utilities, medical. They all told the story of a woman stretched thin, living paycheck to paycheck, with no safety net to fall back on. It wasn't just her hand that was broken, it was the fragile balance of a life lived on the edge of collapse. Harold's heart sank as he realized how much weight she carried alone, but he also knew that desperation could force people to hide truths they feared others wouldn't understand. He needed to look closer, beyond the smile she wore for customers, beyond the half-truths she fed to cover something deeper. Rumors circulated among the staff, whispered in the quiet moments when Ross wasn't nearby. One cook admitted that Ross had a temper, snapping at employees for small mistakes. Another waitress confided that Denise often left work in silence, avoiding conversation, her eyes fixed on the floor. It was the kind of behavior people noticed but chose not to question, afraid of drawing Ross's anger toward themselves. A neighbor Harold spoke to hinted at something even more troubling. They mentioned Denise wearing long sleeves in the heat of summer, makeup too heavy around her eyes, and bruises she claimed came from bumping into doors or tripping over boxes. The stories felt rehearsed, repeated enough times to become a shield. Yet to Harold, every detail painted the same picture. Denise was hiding something she was too afraid to speak aloud. Still, not everyone believed the same story. Some co-workers brushed off her injury as the result of clumsiness. They said Denise had always been accident-prone, dropping dishes, cutting her fingers on knives, rushing through tasks with too little rest. Others speculated that she had a secret second job, perhaps cleaning houses or working late-night shifts, and the broken hand was just the cost of overworking herself. These theories spread easily, filling the silence with assumptions, but Harold wasn't satisfied. He had seen enough in his lifetime to know when people were covering for something darker. The inconsistencies gnawed at him. Her time cards didn't align with unexplained gaps and late arrivals that never made sense. Medical forms she should have filed were missing entirely, erased as if someone wanted them gone. Each detail raised more questions than answers, leading Harold deeper into the quiet investigation he carried out from the corner booth of his own diner. For days, he watched, listened, and pieced together fragments of truth from the scraps people left behind. Denise's nervous glances, Ross's sharp voice, the wary way co-workers avoided certain topics. All of it pointed to something boiling just beneath the surface. And then, one night, Harold saw something that changed everything. It happened late one evening, long after the dinner rush had faded and only a few regulars lingered over their coffee. Harold sat quietly in his booth, the low light of the diner casting long shadows across the floor. Denise Carter moved with visible exhaustion, her bandaged hand trembling as she cleared tables one by one. Then, as she stepped into the narrow hallway leading to the back room, Ross followed close behind. From Harold's seat, he caught sight of Ross's hand snapping out, gripping Denise by the arm with a force that made her body jolt. Denise flinched instantly, her tray rattling against the wall, eyes wide with fear. In that moment, Harold saw everything he had been suspecting, confirmed in a single gesture. This wasn't clumsiness. It wasn't overwork. This was control, plain and raw, hidden only until someone dared to look closely enough. Denise tried to steady herself, brushing a strand of hair from her face with her free hand, but the truth was written across her expression. The faint purple marks beneath her sleeve, the way she pulled her arm back and covered it, as if to hide the evidence, spoke louder than any explanation she might have offered. Ross leaned close, his voice low and sharp, though Harold couldn't hear the exact words. What he could see was Denise shrinking back, nodding quickly, as if trying to appease him, to make the moment pass without further escalation. Harold's heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had wanted answers, but not this. Not proof that one of his own employees was being broken down day after day inside the walls of the diner he built to be a safe haven. The truth landed heavily. This wasn't just an accident, this was abuse. The bruises Denise had been hiding were not the marks of a fall or the slip of a knife. They were the evidence of intimidation, of threats, of a woman caught in the grip of a man who wielded power not only as her manager, but as someone who understood the weight of her financial desperation. Ross had cornered her in silence, weaponized her vulnerability, and left her with the impossible choice between enduring his cruelty or losing the job she so desperately needed. The realization cut Harold deeply. He had disguised himself to learn the truth of his diner, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality now staring back at him. For Denise, every shift had been a tightrope walk across fear and survival. Ross had made sure she believed her voice held no value, warning her that if she ever spoke up, her job would be gone and her reputation ruined. He preyed on the very dignity she worked to protect, twisting her silence into a shield for his own behavior. Denise had kept smiling for the customers, kept working with her broken hand, all because she feared the consequences of telling the truth. And now, with Harold as the silent witness in the corner, the full picture came into focus. The manager, respected by some, feared by others, had crossed a line long ago. The loyal waitress, admired by customers for her resilience, had been carrying far more than anyone realized. The revelation brought with it a swell of emotion, not just for Harold, but for anyone who might hear this story. Rage at Ross for abusing his position, sympathy for Denise who had endured more than anyone should, and an overwhelming sense of injustice that this had been allowed to go on unchecked. Harold clenched his fists beneath the table, torn between revealing himself in that very moment or waiting to gather more evidence. He knew what he had seen, and he knew it demanded action. But something told him this was just the beginning. That Denise's story held even more painful truths yet to be uncovered. And Harold also knew that once the truth began to unravel, the lives of everyone connected to this diner would never be the same again. The weight of silence could only last so long. One evening, as Denise Carter wiped down the counter after the final customers left, Harold approached her quietly. He had seen enough, and the disguise he wore no longer mattered. In a steady voice, he told her the truth, that he was not just another worker, but the owner of the diner itself. Denise froze, eyes wide, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For the first time in weeks, she let her shoulders fall, no longer carrying the burden of secrecy. Tears welled in her eyes, her body trembling as she finally released words she had held back for too long. With a shaking voice, she admitted the truth. Ross had been controlling her, humiliating her, and using her injury as a tool to push her harder, always under the threat of losing her job if she dared speak. Harold listened in silence, every detail of Denise's story driving deeper into him like a blade. She told him about the night Ross shoved her into the storage shelves, the night her hand struck the edge and fractured. She explained how Ross ordered her to lie to the staff and customers, to say it happened at home. She spoke of bills stacking on her kitchen table, the rent notices that made her desperate to keep the job no matter the cost, and the fear that if she resisted, Ross would blacklist her from every diner in town. Each word Denise shared painted a fuller picture of the torment she had endured, and by the end her tears spilled freely. For Harold, it was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The diner he had built to provide opportunity had become the very place where one woman's dignity was stolen. The confrontation could not wait. The following morning, Harold summoned Ross to the back room where the truth would finally be laid bare. Ross entered with his usual confidence, his tie slightly crooked, his expression smug as though he already knew how to twist the conversation in his favor. But Harold was no longer a silent observer. With a firm voice, he recounted what he had seen. Ross's grip on Denise's arm, the bruises she could no longer hide, the broken hand she had worked through out of fear. Ross scoffed, denying every word, insisting Denise was clumsy, that she fabricated her story to cover up her own mistakes. Yet Harold had more than observation on his side. He laid out the inconsistencies in Ross's time cards, the missing medical forms that should have been filed, and statements from co-workers who, emboldened by Harold's presence, began to admit what they too had witnessed in whispers for months. Ross's denials grew weaker with each passing moment. The confident manager began to unravel, his voice cracking under the weight of mounting testimony. Customers who had long admired Denise's resilience now came forward, recalling how often she worked in pain, how they noticed her flinches when Ross passed too close. Neighbors spoke of nights they had heard raised voices from her apartment, moments when Denise's strength had faltered behind closed doors. Piece by piece, the image Ross had crafted of control collapsed, leaving only the raw truth behind, a man who had abused his authority and silenced a woman who deserved better. The diner, once divided by whispers and fear, began to unite. Co-workers who had once turned a blind eye now stood firmly by Denise's side, vowing not to let silence protect cruelty again. Justice came not in a single moment, but through the undeniable force of community. Ross was removed from his position, the diner severing ties with him permanently. Authorities became involved, ensuring that his actions did not go unanswered. For Denise, the relief was overwhelming, though the scars of her experience would not disappear overnight. What mattered most was that for the first time in a long time she felt safe. With Harold's support, she received the medical attention she had long postponed, and the diner itself transformed into what it was always meant to be, a place of belonging, not fear. Denise returned to her role, but now she worked without the constant shadow of intimidation. Each smile she offered customers was no longer a mask of survival, but a reflection of the dignity she had regained. For Harold, the lesson was clear. Ownership carried more than profit, it carried responsibility. And justice had finally been served. What happened in that small-town diner was never just about a waitress with a broken hand. It was about silence, fear, and the quiet battles that so many women fight behind closed doors, unseen by the world around them. Denise Carter was not just a worker balancing trays through the pain. She was a mother, a neighbor, a friend, someone whose story could belong to anyone we pass by on an ordinary day. For Harold, her courage became a mirror that forced him to see that leadership is not only about profit or reputation, but about protecting the dignity of those who carry the weight of his business on their shoulders. For Denise, survival had become routine. But finally, her voice was heard. In time, Denise's life began to look different. The bruises faded, her hand healed, and the crushing weight of fear no longer pressed against her every step. She smiled more easily, not because she was forced to, but because there was genuine relief behind it. With the support of her community, she found the strength to rebuild. Nights once filled with anxiety became moments of peace as she tucked her children into bed, knowing that tomorrow no longer brought the same threats it once did. At the diner, co-workers who once stayed silent now checked in, offering kindness instead of judgment. And in those small gestures, Denise began to trust again, realizing she had never truly been alone. But the questions left behind are not Denise's alone. They belong to all of us. How many people do we pass each day, hiding pain behind a smile? How many Denises serve our meals, ring up our groceries, or walk through our neighborhoods carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear? And if you had been there, sitting in that booth while Denise worked through her broken hand, would you have spoken up? Or would the silence of the room have carried you along with it? These questions linger, because the story of Denise Carter is not only about what was uncovered in one diner, but about the quiet realities so many continue to face. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Denise Carter's story was powerful, but it was not unique. Across the United States, thousands of women continued to work through pain, injury, and abuse, often in silence. Studies from the U.S. Department of Labor reveal that nearly 1 in 4 working women have experienced harassment or intimidation in their workplace, and countless others push through illnesses or physical injuries out of fear of losing their only source of income. For women between the ages of 40 and 64, the burden is often heavier, as many balance not just jobs but families, aging parents, and mounting bills. What Denise endured at the diner was one story, but it echoed a far larger truth about resilience and survival. Her broken hand was more than an injury. It was a symbol of how far someone can be pushed before they finally find their voice. Imagine the countless voices that remain unheard. One woman from Ohio described years of hiding her bruises under long sleeves, clocking in every day as if nothing was wrong, terrified that speaking out would leave her children without food on the table. Another from Texas admitted she never reported her injuries at work because she feared her manager would retaliate, just as Ross had done to Denise. A third from California confessed that the hardest part was not the pain, but the silence of her co-workers who saw, but chose to look away. These testimonies are reminders that Denise's struggle is part of a much larger pattern, one that thrives in secrecy and silence. Each story reveals the courage it takes to endure and the devastating cost of that silence. Harold's decision to step in at his diner became more than an act of justice for one woman. It became a statement about leadership, responsibility, and the need for accountability in every workplace. His actions remind us that while one boss can fail, another can choose to protect. But Denise's story also forces us to confront a harder truth. For every Harold who sees and acts, there are many who never look closely enough. And for every Denise who finds the courage to speak, there are countless others still waiting for someone to listen. The truth is, Denise's story is not the only one. Others remain hidden, waiting in the shadows of diners, factories, and offices across America. And Denise's story is not the only one. The diner that once held whispers of fear and silent suffering now feels different. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation carry a lighter tone, the staff moving with ease rather than dread. Denise Carter, who once balanced trays with trembling hands and hid her pain behind a practiced smile, now greets customers with a confidence that had long been missing. Her broken hand has healed, but more importantly, so has her spirit. Where once she flinched at the sound of Ross's sharp voice, she now moves freely, no longer under the shadow of his control. The same walls that once bore witness to her struggle now hold her laughter, and the diner has become a place of warmth again. Customers notice the change, sensing something different, even if they don't know the whole story. What they see is a woman standing tall, reclaiming the dignity she nearly lost. Harold, no longer disguised, often sits at the corner booth, quietly observing the life of his diner unfold. To the customers, he is just another older man enjoying a cup of coffee. But in his mind, every sound, every movement carries weight. He reflects on the journey that began with one small detail: a waitress with a broken hand. That detail, so easily dismissed by others, had revealed the depth of Denise's hidden struggle. Sometimes, Harold would later admit, the smallest things, a broken hand, a nervous smile, reveal the deepest truths. His choice to step in, to act when silence might have been easier, not only changed Denise's life but reshaped the fabric of the community around them. For Harold, justice wasn't an abstract idea. It was a responsibility that began the moment he chose to truly see what others ignored. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the diner settled into a new rhythm. Co-workers who once stayed silent now stood closer together, bound by a sense of loyalty and trust. Customers who had once looked away when Denise's pain was obvious now engaged more kindly, leaving generous tips, offering words of encouragement. The air inside felt brighter, carrying the sense that something important had shifted. Denise herself began to believe in her own strength again, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had survived it. She had faced humiliation, fear, and isolation, and yet here she was, still standing, still serving, still fighting for a better life for her children. Her story was no longer one of silence and hidden bruises, but of resilience, truth, and renewal. And in that quiet diner, tucked in the heart of a small American town, life went on. But for those who had lived through it, the memory of what had been uncovered remained, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary battles can unfold unseen. Denise's broken hand had once been a symbol of her suffering. Now, it was a mark of her survival, a story that would never be forgotten. Denise Carter's journey is more than a story about a waitress in a small-town diner. It is a reminder of how much strength it takes to endure in silence, and how powerful it can be when that silence is finally broken. Her courage shows us that behind every smile, behind every polite nod to a stranger, there may be a story waiting to be heard, a story of pain, of survival, and of resilience. Harold saw what others missed. He noticed what many dismissed. And when he chose to act, when he chose to step out of disguise and stand beside Denise, lives were changed forever. The question is, what would you have done if you were in Harold's shoes? Would you have spoken up, or would you have turned away? Tell us in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. And before we close, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We share these powerful true stories not just to shock, but to inspire, to challenge, and to remind us all of the strength that lives in ordinary people like Denise. And if you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened in the next one. A story so unexpected, so deeply moving, that you'll be left questioning everything you thought you knew about resilience and justice. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss it.